The year was 1904. In a quiet English town, life moved slowly, caught between the weight of tradition and the march of modern invention. Horses still pulled carriages through narrow stone streets. Gas lamps flickered in the evening fog. But within the stillness of that year, a photograph was taken, one that would survive far longer than anyone who stood before the camera. It was the portrait of a child. Her name was Catherine Doyle. At first glance, the photograph seems harmless, just another relic from a forgotten family album, stiff and posed like so many old photos from that era. A little girl in a simple dress, her hair carefully parted, her expression locked in stillness by the slow shutter of the camera. Families of the time clung to such photographs, knowing they might be the only trace left after death. But this one was different. Look closely at the image. Catherine is smiling. In 1904, smiles were rare in photographs. Exposure times were long. Subjects were told to remain still, to present a solemn face. Yet Catherine's lips curl into an expression that is far too bright, far too knowing. A smile that does not belong to a child of her age. At first it feels like warmth. But the longer you stare, the colder it becomes. This was not just a portrait. It was a clue. A warning. The Doyle family was considered respectable, though whispers always surrounded them. Some said their home carried an air of unease, as if the walls themselves held chilling secrets. Others believed Catherine's smile came from something far darker, that she was touched by forces no child should ever know. To understand the mystery of Catherine Doyle, you must step into the unsettling history of 1904. It was a time when the boundaries between science and superstition blurred, when families still clung to forbidden languages and half-forgotten rituals, when post-mortem photography captured the dead as though they were merely asleep, photographs that today are disturbing images of grief. And sometimes, something else. The portrait of Catherine seemed alive. Too alive. And those who looked upon it felt unsettled, as though she was looking directly back at them. Some whispered that her smile grew wider with each passing year, that the eyes followed them if they dared hold her gaze. This was no ordinary photograph. It was a relic of dark history, a fragment of horror storytelling preserved in silver and glass. And though it began as a simple family portrait, it would soon become tied to one of the town's most enduring unsolved mysteries. Catherine Doyle was more than just a child. She would become the story that haunted generations, the girl who smiled. Until you saw the details. What was hidden inside that smile? Why did neighbors whisper of her late-night laughter echoing through the streets? And how did a child so carefully preserved in a photograph vanish forever, lost in time? The answers lie ahead. But for now, all that remains is the image, the unsettling history of one strange family, and the child whose smile should not exist. The town where Catherine Doyle lived was small, almost forgotten, a place where history lingered in the cracks of cobblestone streets. Old stone cottages leaned against each other like weary souls. The air smelled of damp earth and smoke from coal fires. It was a community rooted in silence, where everyone knew each other's names. And everyone carried secrets. Life there was marked by superstition. Families whispered of curses that clung to certain houses, of haunted places where no one dared linger after sunset. Shadows seemed heavier, thicker, as if the town itself was holding its breath. And though the modern world was beginning to creep in, electric wires, railways, the buzz of progress, this town remained lost in time, tethered to older, darker ways. It was in this place that the Doyle family became both respected and feared. On Sundays, they were seen in church, dressed in proper attire, their posture upright. But behind closed doors, the whispers grew louder. Strange families were often the subject of gossip, but with the Doyles, it felt different. Neighbors told stories of Catherine's mother speaking in a forbidden language late at night, words no one could recognize, carried on the wind through cracked windows. Others swore they heard the sound of a child laughing when no children were near. The people of the town lived with a constant unease. Their homes bore reminders of the past, faded portraits on the walls, relics of post-mortem photography tucked away in drawers. images of loved ones who had died too young. Death was never far. Every family had lost someone. But what disturbed them most was not the memory of their own dead. It was the smile of a living child, captured in an image that felt wrong, as though Catherine herself did not belong entirely to this world. Look closely at the photograph again. At first, it seems harmless, but in the stillness of her face are eerie details. The curve of her lips, the sharpness of her gaze. Details that should not unsettle, yet do. Some said it was merely the fault of the exposure, an accident of light and shadow. But others insisted the photograph revealed a hidden truth, that Catherine was not like other children. Whispers spread quickly. Some believed the Doyles were cursed. Others thought their home was haunted by something older than memory, something that clung to Catherine herself. Children avoided playing near the Doyle house. Parents warned them not to speak her name. Yet curiosity lingered, because everyone in the town could not stop looking at that one unsettling photograph. The town was more than a backdrop. It was a character in this story, a place where the sinister past and the fragile present collided. Each narrow street, each crumbling stone wall, held chilling secrets of forgotten events. And somewhere in the heart of it all was the girl who smiled when no one else did. Catherine Doyle. But the smile was only the beginning. What came after would drive the town into silence. The Doyle family lived on the edge of town, in a house that seemed too large for its inhabitants. A tall, narrow structure of stone, its windows stared blankly across fields that always looked a little darker than the rest. Vines crawled up the walls, their tangled forms giving the house the appearance of something alive, something breathing. To the townsfolk, the Doyles were both respected and feared. They were seen as proper, attending Sunday service, keeping their land in order, and upholding the manners expected of a family of their standing. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. Everyone knew it. The father, Thomas Doyle, was a stern man. He worked with his hands, his face weathered by years of labor in the growing industries that pressed at the edges of the town. People described him as cold, his words few, his eyes sharper than most. He carried himself like a man who held secrets close, secrets heavy enough to bend his shoulders, but never break his silence. His wife, Margaret Doyle, stood in sharp contrast. Pious in public, kneeling longer than others in prayer, her hands always folded, her gaze always downward. But neighbors spoke of her in whispers. They claimed she could be heard late at night, her voice rising in strange, forbidden language, words that sounded neither English nor Latin but something older. Some believed she had inherited these words from her family, who came from far-off places with stories of curses and rituals long thought buried. Then there were the children. 2 boys, quiet and obedient, and Catherine, the youngest. Catherine was different from the start. The boys blended into the town, their behavior unremarkable. But Catherine stood out, not for beauty, nor for brilliance, but for the way she unsettled those around her. She smiled too often, too easily, in moments when no smile was expected. At funerals, during storms, even when scolded. Her laughter echoed through the Doyle home, sharp and bright, as though she knew something others did not. Strange families were not uncommon in small towns. But the Doyles carried an air of unease that clung to them like a shadow. Visitors who entered their home described the air as heavy, stale, as though the house itself disapproved of their presence. Old photographs lined the walls, including several disturbing images of relatives long deceased, post-mortem photography, where the dead were propped and dressed to appear alive. To most families, such portraits were a mourning tradition, a way to hold on to what was lost. But in the Doyle home, the dead seemed too present, their painted eyes fixed and watching, their lifeless bodies frozen in poses far too lifelike. One photograph in particular drew murmurs. It showed a young woman from Margaret's side of the family, her face pale, her hands folded neatly across her chest. Yet those who looked at it swore her lips held the faintest hint of a smile, one that mirrored Catherine's unsettling grin. It was as though the smile had been passed down, inherited like a curse. Neighbors grew wary. They avoided eye contact with Thomas, who rarely spoke, and they crossed the street to keep distance from Margaret. But Catherine drew the most attention. Other children whispered about her, saying she would watch them from windows, smiling even when no one else was near. One boy swore he heard her laughing from the attic of the Doyle home long after the family had gone to bed. Another claimed Catherine could tell him what he had dreamed the night before, repeating his secret fears back to him in a sing-song voice. The Doyle family became an object of fascination and fear. Whispers painted them as cursed, tied to haunted places, and chilling secrets better left buried. Yet no one dared confront them directly. In a town where gossip ruled, silence around the Doyles became its own kind of warning. And still, there was the photograph. The one taken in 1904. Catherine sat at the center, her brothers rigid at her side, her parents behind her, upright and stern. At first, it looked like any family portrait, stiff and ordinary. But once the townsfolk saw it, their suspicions deepened. Catherine's smile stood out like a wound. Too wide. Too knowing. In contrast, her parents' expressions were severe, her brothers blank. Only Catherine smiled, as though she alone understood something the rest of the family refused to admit. Some said the photograph captured the hidden truth of the Doyles, that behind the facade of a respectable family, something sinister lurked. Others insisted the smile was a sign, a message, perhaps even a warning of what was to come. Dark history often hides in plain sight, concealed in ordinary moments, frozen in old photos. The Doyle family portrait became one such moment, a disturbing image that, once seen, could never be forgotten. And as the months passed, that photograph would come to define the family, not for what it showed, but for what it hid. The Doyles were more than a family. They were a mystery wrapped in unsettling history, their lives shadowed by whispers of curses, haunted bloodlines, and secrets no one dared speak aloud. And at the center of it all was Catherine Doyle, the child who smiled when she should not have. But the smile was only the beginning. Soon, the Doyle family's carefully built walls of silence would begin to crack, and what spilled out would haunt the town forever. Catherine Doyle's smile was unlike any other. It was not the innocent expression of a child at play, nor the polite curve expected in a formal photograph. Her smile carried a weight, a knowing that unsettled those who saw it. It was bright, yet cold, cheerful, yet laced with something unspoken, a detail hidden beneath the surface that made grown adults recoil. From the moment she could walk and speak, Catherine displayed an uncanny awareness of the world around her. Neighbors recalled her wandering the streets at dusk, staring into the shadows with an intensity that seemed impossible for a child of her age. She would smile at empty corners, at rooms no one else could see, as if acknowledging secrets that only she understood. Her laughter was just as peculiar. It was high-pitched, musical, yet somehow hollow, echoing through the Doyle home long after the rest of the family had gone to bed. Sometimes, it was heard when no child was nearby, slipping under doors and through cracked windows. The townsfolk whispered that Catherine had a connection to something beyond the ordinary, a presence that walked with her, unseen yet always there. Inside the Doyle home, the air seemed different when she was around. Furniture creaked for no reason. Shadows moved along walls where there should have been none. Even her parents, who were themselves steeped in strict discipline and hidden secrets, seemed uneasy in her presence. Margaret Doyle, Catherine's mother, once reportedly muttered to a friend that her daughter's smile was too old for this world, though she never explained why. Thomas Doyle, the father, remained silent, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear whenever Catherine's grin appeared unexpectedly. Photographs of Catherine captured more than just her image. They captured the peculiar nature of her presence. The 1904 family portrait, now infamous, shows her smile frozen in time, her gaze unnervingly direct. At first glance, it seems harmless. But hidden in the shadows is something sinister, a slight asymmetry in her expression, a glimmer in her eyes that shifts depending on how you look at it. Some historians and paranormal researchers claim that her expression appears to change subtly over time, as though the photograph itself preserves a secret that grows darker with each passing year. Neighbors began to share stories of eerie details connected to Catherine. One recalled how she could recite information she could not have possibly known, a merchant's secret debts, the contents of a hidden drawer in a neighbor's home, private conversations overheard only once. Another remembered seeing her stand in the graveyard at night, smiling at headstones as if in conversation with those long dead. Forbidden language was said to slip from her lips, words that no adult could recognize, yet carried a strange rhythm, almost like a chant. Her peculiar smile was not just unsettling. It became a symbol of fear and fascination. Children in the town avoided her, convinced she could see into your soul. Adults, equally disturbed, debated whether she was sick, blessed, or cursed. Some believed she was the child of a haunted family line, destined to carry secrets that had been buried for generations. Others whispered that her smile marked her as something otherworldly, a vessel of hidden truth, a key to a mystery no one dared explore. The smile also affected her surroundings in inexplicable ways. Pets refused to enter rooms where she lingered. Windows fogged mysteriously in her presence. Even the town's church, a place of refuge for many, seemed to darken slightly when she passed by. People who studied her photographs reported a creeping sense of unease, as though Catherine's expression was not just a frozen image but a lingering presence, watching, waiting. Despite the fear, Catherine's smile drew attention. Families kept her portrait close, though they did so reluctantly, as if preserving it might contain the unnerving energy it emitted. Some claimed they could feel it staring at them late at night, the corners of her mouth twitching in ways that defied explanation. Post-mortem photography, common in that era, often captured children who had passed too soon, but Catherine was alive. And yet, there was something deathlike in her expression, something that hinted at knowledge and experience far beyond her years. Even her siblings noticed it. Her brothers often recoiled when Catherine's smile appeared without reason, whispering that it wasn't the Catherine we know. Friends reported that she would sometimes sit silently in a room, staring at them, smiling in a way that seemed to strip away their courage. Adults, too, felt the pull of her smile, a mixture of fascination, fear, and dread. The peculiar nature of Catherine's expression became central to the town's whispered stories, a chilling secret that bound her to the house, to the photograph, and to the unsettling history of the Doyle family. And as she grew, the smile seemed to deepen, not fade, hinting at a darkness that was waiting, always waiting, just beneath the surface. No one could explain it. No one dared question it openly. And yet, every observer knew Catherine's smile was not innocent. It was a sign, a warning, a piece of the larger mystery that had begun to take root in the town and would not be forgotten. The photograph was meant to be ordinary, a simple family portrait, a memento to preserve memory. But in the hands of fate, ordinary often becomes sinister. The Doyle family gathered in the small studio of a local photographer. The air smelled of chemical fumes from developing plates, and the light from the large window fell unevenly across the room, casting shadows that seemed to shift as if alive. Catherine sat in the center, her brothers stiff and upright beside her, their faces pale and serious. Thomas and Margaret stood behind them, both rigid, their hands folded carefully, eyes trained on the lens. The process was long. Cameras of the era required children to remain perfectly still for minutes at a time. Many children cried or squirmed, and photographers grew accustomed to capturing only solemn expressions. But Catherine, she smiled. Always. It was unnatural, the way her lips curved into that same peculiar grin that had already unsettled her family. The photographer warned her to remain still, but she did not fidget, did not complain. She simply looked at the camera, unblinking, smiling as though she were aware of something no one else could see. The photographer, a man of science and reason, felt a chill that he could not explain. He glanced at her parents. Margaret's eyes flickered nervously. Thomas's jaw tightened. Yet no one spoke of it. It was only a photograph, a moment to be captured, and still, something in the air felt wrong. The exposure took longer than expected. Shadows lengthened, creeping along the walls, darkening corners that should have been well lit. When the plate was finally removed from the camera, The image appeared clear, ordinary. A child, her family around her, all posed as expected. But at first glance, it seemed too alive. Catherine's smile looked sharper, almost deliberate, her gaze piercing the observer with a clarity that defied explanation. Look closely at the photograph. At first, it appears to be a simple family portrait, but hidden in the shadows is something sinister. The corners of the room seem darker than they should be, and Catherine's eyes. They follow you. They do not merely capture a moment, they hold it. They hold something forbidden, something that should not exist within a child's photograph. Neighbors who later glimpsed the image described a sense of unease that would not fade. Some claimed the shadows in the photograph moved when no one was looking directly at them. Others reported that Catherine's smile seemed to change subtly over time, widening or twisting ever so slightly, though they knew such things were impossible. It was as though the photograph itself carried a hidden truth, a secret left behind by forces beyond understanding. The photograph did more than just document a moment. It preserved a fragment of the Doyle family's unsettling history. The house, with its creeping vines and heavy air, was immortalized in the background. The shadows of the walls, the faint reflection in the glass of the window, the posture of her brothers, all became part of a record of eerie details that would haunt anyone who dared study them. Even the photographer could not shake the feeling that something had been captured beyond the lens. He later described an unusual light flickering across the room during the exposure, though no lamp had changed. Others who viewed the image swore Catherine's eyes followed them, her smile knowing, almost mocking. Post-mortem photography had long been practiced to preserve the dead, but here was a living child, yet the image held the same unnerving quality, a frozen moment that felt suspended between worlds. The photograph would become the first piece of evidence that Catherine Doyle was no ordinary child. Her peculiar smile, captured in silver and glass, hinted at hidden truths, chilling secrets, and an unsettling history buried beneath the polite facade of her family. It was not merely a photograph. It was a warning, an artifact of horror storytelling and dark history intertwined. It remained in the Doyle household for months, passed from hand to hand with growing apprehension. Margaret reportedly refused to leave it displayed for long, while Thomas treated it as an uncomfortable relic he could not discard. And Catherine? She looked at it often, smiling the same way she did in the photograph, as if she understood something no one else could, a secret hidden inside the image that would remain unsolved for years to come. The townsfolk whispered, too. Some dared to peek at the photograph during visits. They said it felt alive, as though the girl in the center were watching, studying, understanding everything about them. And in those quiet moments, the Doyle home seemed to exude a strange energy, the air thick with the weight of secrets, vanishing children, and a sinister past just waiting to be revealed. No one could explain why a simple photograph, a tool meant to preserve memory, had captured something so disturbingly alive. Yet all who saw it agreed on one thing. Catherine Doyle's smile was no ordinary expression. It carried a darkness, a mystery, a truth hidden in plain sight. And that truth would not remain buried forever. The photograph did more than sit in a frame. It spread, quietly, like a shadow across the town. Whispers began to form in hushed tones along the cobblestone streets, in church pews, and at the market stalls. The townsfolk could not explain it. Yet everyone sensed that something was wrong with the Doyle family. At first, it was subtle. A mother would warn her child not to wander near the Doyle home. A shopkeeper would glance nervously at the photograph displayed in the window, muttering about the child who should not exist. The curiosity that drew some to peer at Catherine's smile was always accompanied by unease, as if looking too closely might invite unseen consequences. Some spoke of the child herself. Catherine Doyle was said to wander the streets late at night, her gaze piercing through windows, lingering on houses long abandoned. Children who saw her in passing would shiver and run home, whispering of a smile that did not belong to this world. She knows things, they said. Things no child should know. The adults were no less disturbed. Families began to speak in the shadows of their homes, exchanging stories of strange families, eerie details, and chilling secrets they had witnessed but could not explain. One neighbor claimed to have heard Catherine reciting forbidden language under her breath, words that sounded old, foreign, and utterly unsettling. Others swore she could repeat things that had been spoken only once, secrets from the town that no one would have expected a child to know. Even the local priest became involved. He had long preached about the dangers of vanity, pride, and curiosity, but Catherine's case unnerved him. When he visited the Doyle home, he reportedly felt a heavy presence, something pressing against the walls and windows. He saw the photograph, and the girl's smile seemed to challenge him, daring him to understand it. Afterward, he warned parishioners to steer clear of the family, though no one could explain why he was so frightened. The town itself began to change. Animals avoided the Doyle property. Windows seemed to fog mysteriously when Catherine was near. And the air around the house always carried a chill, even in summer months. Some claimed they could feel eyes upon them when passing the garden gates, though no one was there. The whispers were relentless, growing louder with every passing week, until the Doyle home became a place of fear, not just curiosity. Even within the family, tension grew. Catherine's brothers grew pale in her presence, their laughter fading when she entered a room. Margaret Doyle would mutter to herself, pacing the hallways, the forbidden language slipping through her lips, almost as if she were trying to protect her daughter, or perhaps trying to contain something far worse. Thomas Doyle, ever silent, became stricter, his discipline harsher, his glances sharper, as though he could sense an impending doom he could not prevent. And the photograph had remained the center of the storm. Families who glimpsed it in passing could not shake the feeling that Catherine was watching them even decades later. Some claimed her smile widened in the frame if left in candlelight too long. Others whispered that shadows in the background shifted subtly, as if the room itself were alive. This simple image, meant to preserve memory, had become a tool of fascination and fear, a relic that carried the Doyle family's sinister past into the hearts of everyone who saw it. The whispers soon turned into warnings. Children were told never to speak Catherine's name aloud. Adults crossed the street to avoid the Doyle home. Even strangers visiting the town sensed the tension, reporting an almost magnetic unease that pulled at them, warning them to turn back. Tales of vanished children, haunted places, and disturbing mysteries began to weave into the town's folklore, tied inexorably to the Doyle family and that single photograph. And then came the first truly chilling stories. People claimed to have glimpsed Catherine at windows that had been closed for years. Some swore they saw her smiling at them in the garden long after dark, her shadow stretching unnaturally across the lawn. Others said that when she laughed, it echoed through empty halls and alleyways, a sound both musical and hollow, carrying a knowledge no child should possess. The town, once sleepy and serene, now buzzed with an undercurrent of fear. It was no longer curiosity that drew attention to the Doyles, but dread. Parents warned their children about strange families and unsettling history. The Doyle home became a locus of mystery, a symbol of things best left forgotten. And at the center of it all was Catherine Doyle, the child who smiled until you saw the details, the smile that whispered of a dark truth hidden in plain sight. The whispers would not end. And what they hinted at was far darker than the town could imagine. The town woke one crisp morning to a silence that felt wrong. Catherine Doyle was gone. Her bed lay untouched, the blankets still folded with the care her mother insisted upon. But the child who had smiled in photographs, who had wandered the streets with that unnerving grin, had vanished without a trace. Her disappearance was not just an absence. It was a shadow that fell over the Doyle home, stretching into the streets, into the minds of every neighbor who had glimpsed her photograph or witnessed her peculiar behavior. The family panicked, searching the house, the garden, even the fields beyond the village. But no footprints, no clues, no whispered hint of her fate could be found. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones. Some claimed they saw her that night, moving through the fog at the edge of the town, a faint smile glowing in the darkness. Others whispered that the lights of the Doyle home had flickered strangely, as though reacting to her departure, shadows dancing along walls that no one could reach. People began to connect the dots, long-forgotten disturbances in the household, the unnatural quality of her smile, the forbidden language murmured by her mother, the strange photographs that seemed almost alive. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Catherine was no ordinary child, and now she was gone. The town's sense of normalcy fractured. Parents warned their children never to speak her name aloud, yet curiosity gnawed at them. The local priest, who had once felt unease in her presence, declared it a matter of divine mystery, though even he could not reconcile the child's disappearance with reason. Stories began to circulate. Some said she had been taken by something unseen, a presence that haunted the Doyle family for generations. Others feared she had simply walked into another world, leaving the town behind, slipping through the boundaries of reality. The photograph became central to every theory. Families examined it obsessively, studying the subtle details, the shadows in the room, the angle of Catherine's smile. Some swore it had changed since the day it was taken. Her eyes, already unnervingly aware, seemed to follow the viewer with more intensity, her grin sharper, a knowing that hinted at secrets too terrible to be spoken aloud. Disturbing images were not uncommon in post-mortem photography, but Catherine had been alive, and yet the photograph carried the same uncanny weight. As days turned into weeks, fear grew. Strange families, forgotten events, and vanished children became topics of hushed conversation. The Doyle home remained, looming and silent, its windows reflecting a darkness no one dared confront. Locals reported hearing laughter echoing from empty rooms, as if Catherine had not left at all. Animals refused to cross the property, and shadows seemed to gather along the edges of the garden, waiting, watching. Whispers carried hints of darker possibilities. Some claimed Catherine had been spirited away by forces tied to her family's past, a hidden truth long buried. Others suggested that she had fallen victim to a sinister fate, one that the photograph itself had predicted. The child who smiled until you saw the details had vanished, leaving behind a lingering presence in the form of that single, unnerving image. Historians and collectors who later discovered the photograph would note its chilling effect. Unlike other images from 1904, it did not fade into memory. It seemed to persist, a haunting reminder of a life abruptly interrupted. Scholars speculated about lost children in Victorian England, about the intersection of superstition and tragedy, about how towns like Catherine's carried secrets that would never be fully understood. Yet even in their analysis, the unease remained. Something about Catherine's disappearance defied logic. Something about her smile suggested that the truth was not meant to be uncovered. The town continued to live under a shadow of uncertainty. Catherine's brothers grew quiet, withdrawn, forever changed by the absence of their sister. Her parents remained behind closed doors, the forbidden language of Margaret's mutterings growing more frequent, as though she were trying to reach her child, or perhaps attempting to contain what had been unleashed. And still, the photograph remained, preserved in glass, the girl's smile frozen in time. A reminder that not all mysteries are solved, not all absences explained. And so the story of Catherine Doyle, the child who smiled in ways no one could understand, entered the realm of legend. A vanished child. A family steeped in secrets. A photograph that would haunt every eye that dared look upon it. The whispers, the fear, the chilling presence of a smile that should not exist, they lingered in the town, in the hearts of those who remembered, in the shadows of rooms long abandoned. The disappearance was not the end. It was a beginning, the beginning of stories that would persist for decades, of unsettling history, of mysterious disappearances and disturbing images, of vanished children whose faces remain locked in photographs, waiting to be understood, and Catherine Doyle's peculiar smile. It would remain, hidden inside the photograph, watching, knowing, waiting. Decades passed, and the Doyle family faded into obscurity. Houses crumbled, streets changed, and most memories of Catherine Doyle were buried beneath time. Yet one relic refused to vanish, the photograph. It resurfaced in the unlikeliest of places, an estate sale, dusty and forgotten in a leather-bound album. The photograph of Catherine, the child who smiled until you saw the details, would once again awaken whispers of dark history and unsettling mystery. Those who first glimpsed the image were struck by its power. At first glance, it seemed like any other old photo, sepia tone, slightly faded, a formal family portrait. But look closer. The shadows behind Catherine were unnaturally dark. Her eyes, unnervingly sharp, appeared to follow observers around the room. And that smile, it was as chilling as ever, as if decades had only sharpened its edge. Collectors and historians examined it meticulously. Some noted the eerie details, the slight asymmetry of Catherine's grin, the way the light hit her face in a way that seemed almost deliberate, and the subtle movements in the background that defied logic. Others claimed that viewing the photograph produced an oppressive feeling, a sense of being watched, as if Catherine's presence lingered in the room. Many refused to keep it longer than necessary, fearing what they could not name. Stories began to circulate once again. People reported that the photograph seemed to change depending on who looked at it. Shadows appeared deeper, corners darker, and Catherine's smile subtly wider. Paranormal investigators who studied the image described the same unsettling sensation reported by townsfolk decades earlier, the feeling that the girl was alive, or something like her spirit remained trapped within the frame. Some suggested it was curse, a lingering fragment of a family steeped in disturbing mysteries and sinister pasts. The photograph became a topic of fascination and dread in equal measure. Scholars explored the Doyle family's history, uncovering forgotten events and post-mortem photography of relatives whose faces eerily mirrored Catherine's smile. They traced whispers of forbidden language spoken by Margaret Doyle, the mother, and the unexplained phenomena that had surrounded the child before her vanishing. Every piece of evidence suggested that the photograph captured more than a simple portrait. It preserved the essence of something beyond comprehension. Collectors who handled the image reported uncanny occurrences. One described waking to find shadows cast in shapes that matched Catherine's pose. Another noticed faint, high-pitched laughter echoing in a room long after closing the album. Some swore her eyes followed them, even when the photograph was laid face down. These experiences transformed the photograph from a mere historical artifact into a relic of horror storytelling, a tangible connection to a vanished child whose life and secrets remained hidden inside the image. The town where Catherine had once lived became aware of the photograph's reemergence. Stories revived as older residents recalled the vanished child, the peculiar smile, and the whispers of a family steeped in chilling secrets. Tourists and historians came seeking the estate sale, curious to witness the image that had once unsettled the community. But no one could stay long. Many claimed the oppressive presence of the photograph was unbearable, as if the house itself had absorbed the essence of Catherine Doyle and was unwilling to let it go. Even the scholars struggled to explain it. Some suggested that the photograph was a historical anomaly, a quirk of early photography that created the illusion of life. Others feared that the child's smile represented something far darker, a lingering consciousness trapped in silver and glass, a presence that would not rest until acknowledged. Post-mortem photography often captured the dead with unsettling realism, but Catherine had lived, and her photograph somehow preserved that same otherworldly energy. The image became a focal point for obsession. Those who studied it found themselves drawn into the story of Catherine Doyle, the strange family, and the vanished child. Each detail in the photograph, the positioning of her hands, the tilt of her head, the shadows cast along the walls, seemed to hint at a narrative hidden in plain sight. And every time someone looked, they reported subtle changes, tiny shifts that suggested Catherine was still present, waiting, watching, silently guarding the chilling secrets of her family. The photograph resurfaced not as a simple artifact, but as a testament to forgotten horrors, a reminder that dark history does not always remain buried. The vanished child, the sinister family, the unsettling smile, everything converged in a single image that defied explanation, leaving observers unsettled and obsessed. It was proof that some mysteries are eternal, that some disturbing images carry a life of their own, and that some children, even when gone, never truly vanish from the world. And as the photograph circulated, those who studied it knew one thing: Catherine Doyle's smile was more than a memory. It was a presence, a secret, a hidden truth preserved for anyone brave or foolish enough to look closely. Over the decades, Catherine Doyle's story transformed from whispered gossip into legend. Her disappearance, the peculiar smile, and the photograph that refused to fade all became subjects of speculation, obsession, and unease. Historians, paranormal researchers, and collectors attempted to piece together the truth, yet the more they learned, the more the mystery deepened. Some believe the answer lay in the Doyle family itself. The Doyles were not ordinary people, they argued. Margaret's muttered forbidden languages, the post-mortem portraits of distant relatives, and the strict, almost ritualistic structure of the household all hinted at practices long forgotten or intentionally hidden. Was Catherine's smile the product of a family steeped in secrets, a child raised to carry knowledge no one else could comprehend? Was she the inheritor of a curse, a living vessel of a sinister past? Others suggested a darker, more supernatural explanation. The photograph, they argued, was not merely an image, it was a trap, a container of energy from something beyond comprehension. Perhaps Catherine's unusual smile indicated a consciousness that straddled worlds, a presence glimpsing into dimensions no one else could see. Post-mortem photography often captured disturbing realism, freezing expressions in ways that unnerved viewers. But here, Catherine was alive, and the photograph seemed to preserve that same otherworldly essence, bending reality in subtle, terrifying ways. Some townsfolk whispered that Catherine had been marked from birth. They told of strange coincidences. Livestock deaths near the Doyle property, sudden illnesses in neighboring households, and even fires that began without cause. Her smile, the most unnerving detail of all, became a symbol, a sign that the child carried an unspoken truth. People spoke of it in hushed tones, afraid that to say it aloud might invite the same unseen presence that had haunted the Doyle home. Scholars explored more rational possibilities. Could Catherine have been gifted, or cursed, with an extraordinary intellect or memory? She had always seemed to know things she could not possibly have learned. Perhaps her smile was a reflection of that awareness, a knowing that unsettled those around her. Yet even rational explanations failed to account for the photograph's effect, the shadows, the subtle changes, the way observers claimed she seemed alive, even decades later. Then there were the paranormal theories, the ones whispered in dark corners by those obsessed with hidden truths. Some believed Catherine had been taken by forces she had glimpsed in forbidden corners of her own home. Perhaps she had vanished into a shadow world, one that exists alongside ours, leaving only the photograph as a bridge between realities. Others argued that the child had become a spectral presence, wandering between houses, watching from the edges of time, her smile a warning, her gaze a message. The photograph itself seemed to encourage speculation. Its unsettling details, the slight widening of her grin, the shadows behind her that sometimes appeared to shift, the way her eyes followed observers, made each theory plausible and terrifying. Some suggested it was a living document, capturing not a moment, but an essence, a hidden truth frozen in silver and glass that no one could fully comprehend. Historians also considered the broader context. Children in 1904 were often exposed to rigid discipline, strict social rules, and, in many cases, isolation from peers. Families kept secrets, some cruel, some protective. Post-mortem photography was common, and communities carried fears and superstitions that modern eyes struggle to understand. Perhaps Catherine's peculiar smile was the culmination of a strange upbringing, a family obsessed with appearances, with secrecy, with controlling what others could see. And yet, even this explanation could not account for the sheer intensity that seemed to emanate from the photograph itself. Collectors and researchers who came into contact with the photograph reported recurring phenomena. Shadows appeared to move on their own, faint laughter echoed in empty rooms, and observers described a feeling of being watched. Some even claimed that attempting to remove the photograph from its frame caused nausea, vertigo, or sudden chills, as if the hidden truth within it resisted exposure. These occurrences fueled theories, each more unsettling than the last, that Catherine Doyle had not only vanished from the town but had left a lasting, almost sentient imprint on the world she had briefly inhabited. And so the theories multiplied, each adding layers to the story, each deepening the mystery. Catherine Doyle became more than a missing child. She became a symbol of forgotten events, hidden truths, disturbing images, and unsettling history. Every researcher, every historian, every curious observer who encountered her photograph felt it. A presence, a secret, a story that refused to be fully understood. No one could say for certain what had happened to Catherine Doyle. Was she a child marked by a family's sinister past? A supernatural presence trapped between worlds? Or merely an ordinary girl whose peculiar smile became magnified by fear, superstition, and time? Perhaps the truth lay somewhere in between, buried beneath layers of forgotten events, post-mortem photography, and chilling secrets that no one dared uncover. Whatever the answer, one fact remained. Catherine Doyle's story was unresolved. Her photograph, her smile, and the whispers that followed her life and disappearance persisted. It was a mystery that invited speculation, dread, and fascination, drawing anyone who encountered it into a world where history and horror intertwined. And in that world, Catherine's smile remained, waiting for the next observer to look too closely, to see the details, and perhaps to understand what had been hidden inside all along. The story of Catherine Doyle, the child who smiled until you saw the details, ends, yet it never truly ends. The vanished girl, the peculiar family, the unsettling photograph, all remain alive in whispers, in shadows, and in the lingering unease of those who dare to study them. The Doyle family faded from records, their house eventually abandoned, overtaken by ivy and the slow decay of time. Streets changed, generations passed, and the town itself grew quieter, more modern, trying to leave the past behind. But history, especially dark history, has a way of returning, of asserting itself when least expected. Catherine's presence, preserved in that single photograph, refused to be forgotten. Look closely again at the image. Notice the smile. At first, it seems ordinary, even charming. But then the details emerge. The unnatural tilt of her lips, the gleam in her eyes that appears almost intelligent, almost aware. Shadows cling to the edges of the photograph, moving subtly in the corner of perception. It is more than a portrait. It is a vessel, a fragment of a life, a secret, a chilling truth preserved for anyone who dares to see. Theories abound, each darker than the last. Some argue she was cursed, a child born into the shadows of her family's hidden history, carrying knowledge that no one should possess. Others insist she became something more than a child, a presence existing between worlds, captured forever in silver and glass. Some claim the photograph itself is haunted, that anyone who observes it too long will sense her awareness, a creeping pull that seems almost alive. Even now, decades later, those who stumble upon the image report unease. Shadows seem to shift, the air grows colder, and that peculiar smile lingers in the corner of vision. Some claim the girl's gaze follows them, as if silently warning them to stop looking, or perhaps inviting them deeper into the mystery. It is a photograph that blurs the line between reality and imagination, between life and something else entirely. Catherine's disappearance remains unsolved, a chilling mystery that has never been explained. Scholars debate, historians speculate, and paranormal enthusiasts search for clues. But no evidence has ever fully explained what happened to the child, why she smiled the way she did, or why the photograph carries such power. The vanished girl, the strange family, the haunted house, they remain locked in time, hidden inside the details of a moment frozen forever. Perhaps that is the essence of the story. Some histories are not meant to be understood. Some truths are too dark to uncover. Forgotten events, vanished children, disturbing images, they exist to remind us that the past is not always what it seems. Shadows linger longer than memory, secrets can survive generations, and photographs, though seemingly inert, may hold more than mere reflections of the past. Catherine Doyle's smile is a reminder of that. It is a doorway into unsettling history, into a mystery that refuses to be forgotten. It speaks of families bound by secrecy, of children marked by forces beyond understanding, of photographs that preserve not only faces but essence, presence, and perhaps even soul. It invites the observer to look, to notice the details, and to confront the hidden truths that lie just beneath the surface of ordinary life. And yet, the photograph also warns. There is danger in knowing too much, in staring too long, in attempting to understand what was meant to remain hidden. Every glance at Catherine's smile carries a weight, a lingering sensation that she is watching, that she remembers, that she waits. The town, once fearful, is gone, but the story remains, carried in shadows, whispered in forgotten halls, lurking behind every old photo, every darkened window, every trace of history we attempt to ignore. As you reflect on Catherine Doyle, consider the unseen details. The vanished children, the strange families, the chilling secrets that refuse to stay buried, the hidden truth locked in a photograph that should have been ordinary, but is anything but. Every smile, every shadow, every whisper of the past can hold a story that stretches beyond time. A story waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to notice. Perhaps you, watching now, are that observer. Perhaps your gaze has already lingered too long. Look again at the photograph. Imagine her smile. Feel the presence of a life that vanished, but not entirely, a mystery that persists, a haunting that has survived decades. Remember that some children are never truly lost, some secrets are never fully revealed, and some images, like Catherine Doyle's, are more than they appear. The past is never gone. It waits, it watches, and in the quiet corners of old photographs, in the details most ignore, it remembers. Catherine Doyle's smile remains, frozen yet alive, a reminder that the line between life and the unseen is thinner than we dare to believe. And as long as someone looks, as long as someone sees the details, the child who vanished in 1904 is never truly gone. The story ends here, but the unease lingers. The photograph, the smile, the vanished child, they wait for the next observer to notice. And perhaps, just perhaps, that observer is you.